Hi, this is that 4x4 show, and my name is Bernie Williams. In this episode, we get to drive Mercedes' ultra-expensive Gelandewagen. We get an update on our disco, and we also get some serious articulation from a very special Jeep. But first, we have Hannes doing some off-road driving German style.
According to legend, the Mercedes Gelandewagen wasn't born in the boardroom in Germany. In the early 70s, the Shah of Iran raised the point of a Mercedes 4x4 military spec.
At the time, the same Shah of Iran was a major shareholder in the Mercedes-Benz company, so the German whitecoats could hardly ignore the points he raised. And so in 1972, development work started as a joint venture between Daimler-Benz and Steyr Daimler-Puch in Graz, Austria. By 1974, the first Gelandewagen test units were driven to the limits and beyond in the Sahara Desert and the Arctic Circle. Finally, in 1979, the first production models built by hand were shipped from Graz and started serving in many armies around the world, and was also sold to the public in limited numbers. A few years later, Mercedes realized there was a demand for a more upmarket, luxurious Gelandewagen, so all kinds of fanciness was added to a civilian G-Wagon. Today, 50% of all Gelandewagens are AMG models. These super expensive, super fast and super opulent Gs are the reserve of the rich and famous. But you have to say that those original 1979 models were really the stuff of legends that paved the way for this tough old Mercedes to become the icon it is.
And this is one of those original Gelandewagens. The real deal and the real McCoy.
This is a 1979 Mercedes Gelandewagen, and probably the oldest unit in South Africa. It's an original 460 series, and this particular unit is powered by a 3-litre 5-cylinder diesel engine. The naturally aspirated engine is no powerhouse, but it will last a few millennia. Another interesting feature on this original model was the fact that you could engage low range at virtually any speed. It also has front and rear lockers, operated via hydraulics and a twin-lever system.
But enough of this history lesson. Let's see if this 34-year-old Merc can still do the off-road mile.
To get to the off-road part, you have to drive the old Merc on the road. And let's not beat about the bush here. It's not exactly a dynamic, grin-inducing ride. In fact, it's pretty old school, in a good old school kind of way. Changing gears, for instance, is a process. Send a tweet directed at the clutch and gearbox informing these mechanical parts of your intention to change the ratio of the gearbox. Wait a second or two and then activate. But if you keep in mind the age of this old Merc, the driving experience is a truly nostalgic one, and one that true petrol heads will appreciate, despite the lack of horses under the bonnet. That said, this Gelandewagen was never designed to be a dynamic on-road performer. Instead, it was über alle, created to be unstoppable and super reliable in the toughest of off-road conditions.
This is one of Gelandewagen's biggest trump cards. The front and the rear differential locks, which can be switched on the go to locked or unlocked.
It's a simple equation. As soon as a 4x4's wheel or wheels lose contact with the ground, the engine's power will be diverted to the wheel or wheels that have no traction, because they have the least resistance. And when this happens, the vehicle loses its momentum and stops, those airborne wheels spinning aimlessly. Most double cab 4x4 buckies come standard with a rear differential lock, which when engaged ensures that both rear wheels are locked to turn together. So even when one rear wheel is in the air, the other one will still have drive and forward momentum can be maintained. It's only a handful of 4x4s that come standard with lockers for both the front and rear wheels. This includes the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, some Toyota Land Cruiser series vehicles, and the Gelandewagen.
This is powered by a normally aspirated 5-cylinder diesel engine. It wasn't about power, it was all about reliability.
Compared to modern cars, the 5-cylinder diesel engine seems woefully inadequate. It produces just 65 kilowatts of power, which is about the same as a 1600 Volkswagen Polo Vivo. That power is combined with 172 Newton meters of torque at 2,400 RPM. It's clearly an older generation engine, but linked to the industrial strength 4-speed gearbox, it will outlast and outplay a few owners along the way. And despite the modest numbers, the engine really steps up to the plate in the bush, where it really matters. Many Gelandewagens in perfect mechanical shape and with more than 500,000 clicks on the clock still run around in South Africa today. Indeed, if Chuck Norris had to be a German car, he'd be the Gelandewagen.
The Benz represents an important part of 4x4 history.
Join us later when Hannes puts the latest 800,000 Rand Mercedes Gelandewagen through its off-road paces, like in really through its off-road paces. The 1979 model certainly looks a little bit rough around the edges, but sometimes simple is the way to go. Personally, I prefer the simple route because electronics do have a knack of letting you down when you least can afford it, and then you're really stuck. Our disco was looking rather haggard when we first laid our hands on it. And slowly but surely the transformation has been taking place and it's looking like a real bruiser right now. So let's get an update. Welcome back to the world of the Land Rover Discovery 1. It's a project that has been ongoing since November 2012. It had the dances of Death Move. We had to replace a whole lot of mechanical parts. The rims were completely refurbished and shod with Bridgestone mud terrain tires. The bodywork that received a new coat of paint, the new leather interior, and now the new dashboard. So the Landy is now with Dwayne Black from Dwayne Services, a company that specializes in custom fiberglass builds. With a refurbished steering wheel and the top half of the instrument panel removed, Dwayne is now ready to get down to business.
I'm going to remove this marked piece, the dashboard, the top part. We're going to replace it with a fiberglass panel. The bottom we leave, and it's going to be a whole new fiberglass covered with a vinyl black material to look brand new.
And the dash certainly needed replacing. Previous owners had tried to keep it relatively in place by using self-tapping screws to keep the dash from curling up.
This part, the vent part's going to stay like this. These vents are going to stay. The handle is going to stay. Like I said, we're just going to remove this on the mark right through. We can make a hole here in the fiberglass for the tab to fit here. Everything here stays exactly the same original as Land Rover made. But this is all going to be fiberglass.
This is the custom flip-open contraption that Dwayne has created for the Samsung tablet, which will live in the top part of the dashboard. Next week, our disco heads off to the East Rand, where it's going to get a new electronic control unit, or ECU, for that lovely V8 motor, and hopefully an exhaust to fit as well. Some places are just made for overlanding, and one of those places is our northern neighbor, Botswana. Up next, we head north and we drive an awesome route. And of course, everything that any 4x4 enthusiast would want, you would find in Botswana. There's plenty of sand, there's water crossings, there's mud, and of course, plenty of animals. It's wild and it's vast. It's a place that more than 50,000 elephants call home. It's the northern parts of Botswana, and it is quite spectacular. The 4x4 route to get you to these amazing places starts just outside the town of Shirobi, about 30 kilometers north of Maun. The sandy gravel roads winds its way through the bush for about 140 kilometers before you reach the idyllic Mogoto campsite, which is part of the Kwai Development Trust run by the local community. The campsite has 10 large camping spots, which are all open and unfenced. You also need to be fully self-sufficient, as there are no facilities whatsoever at Mogoto. It's just you, your campsite, and a whole lot of wild animals. Elephants are plentiful, as are hippos, crocodiles, and most other game and predators too. Since you camp in the wild, where elephants and other animals stroll through your campsite, you have to have your wits about you at all times. After a few days camping in what some would describe as the wild Garden of Eden, you can head north to the famous Savuti Marsh area. This road is long and in places rather uncomfortable. You enter Savuti through the Mababi Gate, and you need to obtain a permit beforehand in Maun to drive through this park. Again, it's not a lazy drive. It's quite sandy in places, and it's best to travel in a convoy of at least 2 vehicles here in case of a mechanical mishap. Remember, there are lots of wild things that may want to eat you, so backup is always a good idea. After the long drive through the game park, you finally reach a tar road that would take you to the town of Kasane. In case you haven't seen enough elephants or other wildlife yet, you can catch one of the many sundowner cruises on the Chobe River. It's so worth it. On the boats, which comes with a guide, you will see hundreds of elephants, buffalo, hippos, crocs, and plenty of other game too. On a bucket list of 4x4 drives, this route rates as one of our all-time favorites. It is said that the best time of the year to make this trip is between June and October. These are the dry months when all the animals gather around the green banks of the Kwai River and the Chobe River, making them easy to spot. For more information about the Mogotu Community Campsite, visit our website. I've just got back from one of the most awesome trips, 16 days in Botswana and Namibia, and one of the places we visited was Van Zyls Pass. When driving down a pass like that, it is imperative that you know how to use the engine braking capacity of your vehicle, and here is how it's done. The secret to safe off-road driving is as slow as possible and as fast as is necessary. Now you can imagine if you come flying over this hill and just driving down here what the consequences are going to be. So I've now stopped, I've assessed the terrain, and I see that I have a situation here where I am going to get cross-axled. That's when you have two opposing wheels hanging in the air and all the power goes to those wheels because power takes the path of least resistance. So when that happens, you're actually going to experience a surge going down the descent. How do I counter that? It's quite simple. Engage your diff lock. You actually paid for it, so use it. And that will give you total control while descending. So I engage the diff lock, put the vehicle into first gear low range and just let it roll through the obstacle, just against engine compression. Don't have to accelerate, you don't have to touch the brakes, just let the vehicle compression do all the work for you. Let me demonstrate it to you. Okay, hier gaan ons. Remember, safety belts always. It's not negotiable, unless we get to water crossings, but that's another story for another day. Right, so we select diff lock and also select first gear low range, and we release the brake and the clutch at the same time and let the vehicle roll into and through the obstacle in a controlled manner. Don't have to touch the brakes, don't have to touch the accelerator. Let the engine compression do all the braking for you. And there we have it, ready for the next obstacle. Some 4x4s are just plain ordinary. I guess that's the way the manufacturers intended them to be. But then you do find the odd extraordinary example, like this Jeep. A few years ago, Pretoria businessman Charles Marais bought a 1997 Jeep Cherokee 4-litre that had belonged to the US Embassy. Charles is a bit of a Jeep man, and there's also a Commander V8 parked in his garage. The Cherokee was to be his family holiday car, so soon a fridge and a drawer system rounded off with an Oompa Oompa sound system was installed. Next, Charles began to play with the suspension setup, and as these things go, one upgrade soon led to another and another and another. Nowadays, Charles has his own custom shop that fabricates special parts and imports others from the United States. We're not really allowed to show you any of his on-car advertising on the box, so please don't look at the stickers on the Jeep. Anyway, back to the Cherokee. The engine remains stock standard, but Charles has added a free-flow exhaust that adds some cool sound effects. The front bar is also one of the company's creations, as is the rear bar, which recently saw some tough 4x4 action. There is a roof rack with a few spotlights on the roof. Inside the cabin, there's a small fridge for beverages between the front seats, a DVD screen for the kids, and a dual battery display monitor. But this Cherokee's real power game is its suspension. With an 8-inch long arm lift riding on custom locally made springs and imported Procom parts, this Jeep currently holds the record on the 4x4 Community Forum website for the best wheel articulation ratio. This Jeep runs on 33-inch mud-terrain tires too, so Charles changed the differential and gearbox ratios to compensate for the larger diameter wheels. The articulation on this XJ, which is based on a monocoque chassis, is simply amazing. And combined with the Jeep's Command Track 4x4 system, the 132 kilowatt 6-cylinder engine and 4-speed automatic gearbox, this Jeep is unstoppable on any kind of 4x4 terrain. Ground clearance is pretty spectacular too, as are the approach, departure and breakover angles. It hasn't been a cheap build, and in his quest for bigger, better and more, Charles has spared no cost in developing the suspension system on the XJ. The upgrade alone amounts to about 55,000 rands worth of tricks. For the rest, says Charles, this 16-year-old Jeep is probably not worth a great deal of money. But for him, this Cherokee is priceless, and he even uses it as his daily runner. It even doubles up as a rally car ever so often, just for fun. Will he ever sell it? Not a chance, says Shaw. A popular motoring myth is that with a bakkie, it's lighter on fuel to drive with the tailgate open than with the tailgate closed. True or false? Let's find out. This motoring myth seems like a no-brainer. And personally, I always used to believe that with a bakkie, with the tailgate open, it's actually lighter on fuel. Right, so to our standard test route then with the Motoring Myths Toyota Hilux. With our tonneau cover removed, we first complete the run with the tailgate open. Next, we close the tailgates, and now, theoretically, it should use more fuel because the airflow is blocked by the tailgate, right? So, apparently not. With the tailgate open, 10.2 liters per 100 kilometers. With the tailgate closed, 10 liters per 100 kilometers. So we did some research, and this seems to be the most logical theory for this. When the tailgate is closed, a swirl of air inside the buck is formed, which kind of acts as a wind deflector. Ultimately, the deflector effect has a slightly less drag than the free flow version, which in turn means it uses marginally less fuel. Up next, we have Hannes driving what has often been termed as the best 4x4 ever to be built. It is the latest Mercedes-Benz Gelandewagen. Earlier, we told you about the history of the Gelandewagen, and we drove the original 1979 model, which is a little bit like driving a cool old truck. Now it's time to swan around in the latest and basic as a truck professional version. Oh, and did we mention the price? That's 800,000 Rand.
That's a lot of cash. There's no radio, no electric windows, and no carpets.
So why is it so expensive? It looks rather a lot like the original, which is probably cool. It's all purpose built and functional and militaristic. The chunky lines, the round headlights, the sweet bulge on the bonnet. Oh, and the 4 seats in the bare cabin that are as comfortable as your dentist's chair. The steering wheel that looks like it was borrowed from a 1982 Mercedes W123 series sedan. At least you get a reasonably modern dash, and there are 2 airbags up front. On the flip side, the air conditioning in the test unit didn't work, which doesn't bode well for quality control. So, looking at the paper facts, 800,000 Rand is very hard to justify.
Maybe a lot of cash was spent on the engine and the drivetrain.
The Benz is powered by Mercedes' 3-litre V6 turbo diesel engine that also does service in a variety of other top-end Mercs. In this role, it has been tuned for a more workhorse-type application. So the engine produces 135 kilowatt of power and 400 newton meters of torque at a very low 1600 RPM. It's all about low-down grunt and lugging power. Power is sent to all 4 wheels via a 5-speed automatic gearbox. The accelerator pedal takes some getting used to. Sometimes it feels like you are activating a switch, and it's either on or off, but you eventually get the hang of it.
This is where this professional is supposed to be unstoppable, a real machine, and worth every penny.
This Gelandewagen uses the same basic suspension setup as the original version. So that's a coil-sprung suspension on solid axles front and rear. The lever system for the differential locks in the old G-Wagon has been replaced by a relatively simple button system. So you can lock the center diff, then add the rear diff lock, and lastly also engage the front locker. In this mode, the Gelandewagen is nigh unstoppable. But there is a problem. Apparently, Mercedes added a stabilizer bar to the Professional's rear suspension setup to enhance its handling prowess. But this addition has severely limited its wheel articulation. So now, when the rear axle sees anything that looks remotely like an axle twister, a rear wheel pops into the air, and if you don't have enough momentum, you ain't going anywhere. Sure, engaging the diff lock or locks fixes the problem, but it's not the kind of problem you'd expect to find in this class of 4x4 in the first place. Another gripe is the brakes.
The brake certainly works. It's extremely sharp, and you have to get used to them.
But even if you think you've mastered that pedal, it catches you out every now and again. But back to the good stuff, like the 5-speed automatic gearbox. In an off-road environment like this, the automatic gearbox works a treat. And even on steep downhills, the gearbox, if you shift it manually to first gear, will manfully assist the engine to brake the big Merc. On very steep declines, you'll need to add some brake courtesy of that right foot. But on most obstacles, it does a sterling job. Overall, the Professional is, with those lockers, a very impressive off-roader.
I know we've said it before, the price of the Merc just doesn't add up. As good, iconic and hand-built as it might be.
Consider what you can buy for 805,000 Rand, which incidentally excludes a maintenance plan. A Porsche Cayenne, 2 Jeep Rubicons, 4 Suzuki Jimneys, a townhouse, and here's another twist. We found this old Gelandewagen 280 GE for sale in Randburg for 81,000 Rand, or 10% of the Professional's price. Sure, the dilapidated old Gelandewagen needs a lot of TLC, but if you really go overboard and spend 200,000 Rand to get it to tip-top shape, it will still only set you back 280,000 Rand. But then again, someone who buys this Merc does so because it's virtually ready to go to war with a 50 caliber machine gun strapped to its roof. It feels as indestructible as any car we've ever driven, and thanks to its strengthened suspension, you can load almost a ton into the loading area. If you have the cash, this would form a great base for a spectacular overland vehicle. You just need to be a politician or have a whole lot of spare cash to afford it. So what's it to be, Hannes?
Although the old one, the articulation felt a lot better on the 4x4 track, nothing can beat the new technology on this one for the day-to-day driving. And if I had a Porsche in the garage, I would have probably bought one of these.
So would I, Hannes. So would I. Great cars, well built, practically unstoppable off-road, but one problem, the price. You're going to need the lotto for this one. Well, folks, that's it for this week. In the meantime, please, 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 we say this every week, and every week I see nothing has changed. Keep left, pass right.
Catch all the latest motoring news in Leisure Wheels magazine. If you want more information about that 4x4 show, find us on Facebook. There you will also find more information about that 4x4 trip in conjunction with Leisure Wheels magazine. That 4x4 show brought to you by Bridgestone, your journey, our passion.